The frozen wilderness of Montana is no place for the faint-hearted, where the chill of winter hides dangers just as much as it showcases beauty. In this harsh environment, life and death are intertwined closely, and one small cat finds himself trapped in a struggle for survival. Alone and hungry, this young feline ventures into a realm far more brutal than he ever imagined. As he moves cautiously through the snow, he senses a shift in the atmosphere. Shadows loom, and suddenly the reality of his situation becomes grave when a pack of wolves appears, eyeing him as their next meal. Yet the course of fate can be unexpected. Just as the wolves close in and hope begins to fade, an unforeseen force steps in, triggering events that challenge nature's usual order. This wild encounter reveals a surprising twist that defies our understanding of survival and instinct amidst the icy grasp of winter. It leads us to ponder whether the natural balance can ever truly be maintained. The bitter wind cuts through the dense pine forest of northern Montana, carrying tiny crystals of ice that shimmer like diamonds in the pale winter sun. It's early February, and the Flathead National Forest lies buried under 3 feet of snow, transforming the vibrant landscape into a stark, white wilderness. Here, life and death play out their timeless dance with relentless regularity. For Max, a 4-month-old cat, this dance has taken a frightening turn. His mother has not returned from a hunting trip 3 days prior, leaving him alone in their den beneath a fallen spruce. Driven by hunger, he ventures out into the world, torn between instinct and fear as he searches for food in a place that seems intent on taking him. His reddish-brown fur, dappled with black rosettes, stands out against the pristine snow, making him vulnerable as he navigates through the forest. His once proud ears are now flat against his head, and his short tail twitches nervously with each tentative step. Weighing only 12 pounds, Max is notably smaller than an adult cat, his youth evident in his awkward limbs and the remnants of kitten fluff still adorning his neck. 20 miles away, in the small town of Whitefish, Montana, Jim Harrison prepares for what he believes will be just another day of monitoring wildlife. At 58 years old, Jim has dedicated nearly 3 decades to his role as a wildlife biologist with the Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks Department. His weathered face reveals the many years spent in the great outdoors, working to understand and protect the delicate balance of life in this rugged landscape. Years of being outdoors had left their mark on Jim. The silver threads in his dark hair and beard seemed to reflect the winter landscape he traveled through so often. "You heading out today, Dad?" Sarah's voice called from the kitchen of their cozy ranch-style home. At 28, she had followed his footsteps, now working as a veterinarian at the local wildlife rehabilitation center. Jim nodded, pulling on his heavy winter boots as he double-checked his gear. Reports indicate increased wolf activity in the eastern sector. "I need to see if they're getting too close to the ranch," he explained. He patted the tranquilizer gun holstered at his side. It was a tool he hoped to avoid using. Over the years, Jim had believed in allowing nature to take its course, stepping in only when absolutely necessary. Sarah appeared in the doorway, handing him a thermos of coffee. "Be careful out there. The weather reports say another storm is moving in by afternoon." "Always am, kiddo," Jim replied with a smile, noting how her nickname remained, despite her impressive credentials. "How's that young mountain lion doing at the center?" "Much better. Should be ready for release by next week," she said, her eyes sparkling with pride. The rehabilitation center had become her passion, a calling that seemed to run in the family. As Jim made his way to his truck, the familiar weight of his equipment felt comforting. Little did he know that this day would challenge everything he believed about nature and the role humans play in it. The morning sun cast long shadows across the snow as he drove his Ford F-150 down the Forest Service road, its snow chains crunching rhythmically on the packed ice below. At the same time, a young cat named Max had ventured farther from his den than ever before. The hunger in his belly was becoming too much to ignore, pushing him to take desperate chances. His mother had begun teaching him to hunt before she disappeared, but those lessons barely scratched the surface of what he would need to survive on his own. Max's sharp ears picked up the sound of claws scraping against bark, maybe a red squirrel or a pine marten. Instinct kicked in as he crouched low, his spotted coat helping him blend into the forest's shadows. But just as he was ready to stalk his potential prey, everything around him shifted. A different sound suddenly froze Max in his tracks. It was the soft crunch of multiple paws on the snow, coming from several directions. The wolf pack had been following him for the past hour, expertly navigating his uncertain trail. At the front was a battle-scarred alpha female known to the locals as Shadow, recognizable by her dark gray coat. With the harsh winter pushing them into new hunting territories, their usual prey, like elk and deer, had become hard to find. This left them with little choice but to consider smaller animals they would normally overlook. Fear filled the air as 5 wolves emerged from the trees, their movements coordinated from generations of hunting experience. Shadow took the lead, her amber eyes locked on Max with a predatory intensity. To her right, her mate, a large male with a distinct white chest, moved to block any potential escape toward the deeper forest. Completing the circle were 3 younger wolves, their tongues hanging out, eagerly anticipating an easy meal. Max's heart raced as he glanced between the wolves. His mother had warned him about these predators, but nothing could have prepared him for the reality of facing a pack alone. Usually, his small size gave him an advantage when navigating the forest's understory. Now, it felt like a cruel joke against such efficient hunters. Meanwhile, Jim Harrison had just wrapped up checking his 3rd monitoring station when he heard it, a high-pitched cry of terror slicing through the winter air like a knife. After 28 years in the field, he had learned to recognize the calls of every predator and prey species in the area, but this sound held a desperate tone that made his chest tighten. Without thinking, he moved through the forest, his snowshoes gliding over the deep drifts with practiced ease. The tranquilizer gun was in his hands, though he knew it would be a last resort. Generally, human intervention in predator-prey dynamics was discouraged, but that cry had stirred something deep within him, beyond mere professional obligation. When he crested a small rise, the scene that met his eyes took his breath away. The wolf pack had a young cat cornered against a granite outcropping, its fur bristling, desperately attempting to appear larger. Jim recognized Shadow immediately. He had been tracking this pack for months. However, it was the little cat that truly captured his attention. The small feline couldn't have been. The young cat, barely weaned and clearly malnourished, suggested it had been alone for several days. Despite this, Jim watched as it bravely swiped at the nearest wolf, its claws finding nothing but air. Time seemed to stretch for Jim as he considered what to do. He understood that predation is a fundamental part of nature. The wolves needed to eat, and nature can be harsh. But seeing the cat fight with such determination sparked memories of all the animals Sarah had rehabilitated at the center. Those small interventions often led to remarkable outcomes, so he made a decision. Jim reached into his pack and retrieved a canister of wolf deterrent, a carefully developed mix of sound and scent from his years of field research. Just as Shadow, the lead wolf, prepared to pounce, Jim activated the device and tossed it between the wolves and their target. The impact was immediate. The canister emitted a high-pitched sound that distressed the wolves, combined with a scent that mimicked their most feared rivals. Shadow's ears flattened, and she stepped back, followed by the rest of her pack. Seizing the moment, Jim positioned himself between the wolves and the cat, projecting authority without aggression. He had learned that wolves weigh risk against reward, and his presence alongside the deterrent was altering that balance. "Easy now, Shadow," he said in a calm, steady voice, holding up one hand while keeping the tranquilizer gun ready in the other. "There's easier prey out there for you and yours." For what felt like a long time, Shadow met his gaze. In that moment, Jim was reminded of why he loved working with wildlife. There was a mix of calculation and intelligence in her eyes. Finally, after what seemed like eternity, Shadow threw back her head and let out a short howl. In unison, the pack retreated into the forest, leaving only their paw prints in the snow as a sign they had been there. With the immediate danger gone, Jim turned his focus back to the cat, which had pressed itself against the rocky outcrop, its small chest rising and falling rapidly from exertion. The signs of the little cat's desperate situation were clear. Its ribs were visible beneath its fur, and its eyes had that glassy look of dehydration. "Hey there, little guy," Jim said softly, trying to soothe the frightened animal. As he slowly took off his outer jacket, he noticed the cat's weak hiss, more a sign of fear than aggression. Surprisingly, it didn't try to run away as Jim carefully moved closer. His years of experience with injured wildlife told him this cat was too tired and malnourished to fight back. With practiced movements, Jim wrapped his jacket around the small feline, creating a secure bundle that would keep it warm and prevent it from scratching him. As he lifted the little creature, he was struck by how light it felt. Definitely too light for a cat of its age. "Sarah's going to love you," he murmured, already imagining his daughter's excitement over this new rescue. Storm clouds were gathering overhead as Jim headed back to his truck, the precious bundle cradled against his chest. It was a tense drive to the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center, with Jim frequently checking on his tiny passenger. The cat had surrendered to exhaustion, finally slipping into an exhausted sleep after the stress of its ordeal. During the drive, Jim called ahead to the center, knowing that Sarah would want to be ready for their arrival. "Dad, everything okay?" she asked through the truck's speakers. "I've got a special delivery for you, kiddo. It's a young cat, probably about 4 months old. It's severely malnourished and dehydrated. Just rescued it from a wolf pack," he explained. There was a brief pause on the line. "Dad, you know about the protocols regarding predator-prey interactions," she reminded him. I know, but Sarah, this one's different. The mother's been gone for days. Looking at its condition, it wouldn't have survived another day out there, wolves or no wolves," he stated, sensing his daughter's professional resolve starting to waver. "Bring it in through the back entrance. I'll have the examination room ready," Sarah instructed. The Montana Wildlife Rehabilitation Center was impressive, a state-of-the-art facility that maintained a deliberately modest appearance. As Jim pulled up to the back entrance, he saw Sarah waiting for him. Her dark hair was pulled back into a practical ponytail, and she wore her scrubs like a second skin. "Let me see our patient," she said as soon as Jim stepped out of the truck. As he gently unwrapped the jacket, Jim's demeanor changed, and Sarah's expression softened. "Oh, Dad, he's beautiful," she said, glancing at the creature that had just awakened during their drive. It blinked at them with tired blue eyes, which would soon change to yellow as it matured. Despite its weakened state, there was a fierce spark of life in its gaze, a sign of its will to survive. "Let's get him inside for a checkup," Sarah suggested, taking the lead to the examination room. The next hour turned into a whirlwind of activity as they assessed the animal's condition. Sarah's skilled hands moved efficiently. She checked vital signs, drew blood samples, and started the careful process of rehydration. "Well, it's definitely a male," she announced mid-task. "He's about 4 months old, just as you estimated. He's severely dehydrated and malnourished, but surprisingly, he has no serious injuries. Considering everything he's been through, he's actually in remarkably good shape." Jim watched from the corner of the room, a small smile forming at the corners of his mouth. "He's a fighter, that's for sure. You should have seen him facing down those wolves." Sarah looked up, her expression serious. "He'll need at least 2 months of rehabilitation before we can think about releasing him, and that's assuming everything goes well." "Does he have a name yet?" Jim asked, knowing how Sarah often named special cases. She paused, studying the creature as she secured the IV line. "Max," she finally said. "He looks like a Max to me." Thus began Max's journey from a desperate survivor to a rehabilitation success story. The first week was crucial. Sarah and her team worked tirelessly to stabilize his condition, and Max proved to be an excellent patient. He accepted treatment with a determination that reflected his will to survive in the wild. Jim visited every day, often bringing his field notes to update Sarah while sitting in Max's recovery room. It seemed that Max began to recognize him, those intelligent eyes tracking his movements with growing interest rather than fear. By the end of the second week, Max had gained enough strength to start exploring his enclosure. His natural curiosity was starting to overshadow his initial apprehension. As weeks morphed into months, Max's recovery became something of a local phenomenon. Sarah had always been careful to maintain a professional distance from the animals in her care, understanding that they would eventually return to the wild. But there was a growing bond forming that was hard to ignore. Max was a unique case. Perhaps it was the way he had been rescued, or how he reacted to people while still holding on to his wild instincts. The rehabilitation process was careful and structured. As Max gained strength, Sarah and her team introduced different activities to help prepare him for his release into the wild. They provided live prey in ways that would encourage him to hunt, while also minimizing human interaction to prevent him from becoming too accustomed to people. Jim continued to monitor the wolf pack that had nearly taken Max's life. He noted how their hunting strategies adapted to the changing winter conditions. For example, Shadow and her pack successfully hunted an elk soon after the encounter with Max. This demonstrated that their attack on the cat was driven by desperation, not typical behavior. As spring began to warm the Montana landscape, Max's release date drew near. He had grown into a healthy young cat with a shiny coat and strong muscles from months of tailored exercise. Sarah chose a release site far from known wolf territories, but still suitable for a cat like Max. The day they chose was clear and cool, with early signs of spring visible in budding trees. Jim and Sarah worked together to prepare Max for transport and felt the weight of the moment, despite their professional backgrounds. "You know," Sarah said as they drove to the release site, with Max secure in his carrier in the back of the truck, "when you first brought him in, I wasn't sure if we were doing the right thing, natural selection and all." Jim nodded, fully understanding. Nature can be harsh, yet it also holds remarkable resilience. Sometimes, all it requires is a small chance. The release site was ideal, featuring rocky terrain with plenty of cover and a good population of rabbits and other prey. As they set up the carrier, Sarah conducted one last check on Max, moving with a practiced yet gentle touch. "Ready to go home, buddy?" she whispered, looking into his calm yellow eyes, which had deepened in color as he matured. When they opened the carrier door, Max sat for a moment, surveying his new surroundings. Then, with the same determination he had shown when facing the wolf pack months earlier, he prepared to step into his new life. As morning sunlight filled the space, he paused for a moment, glancing back at Jim and Sarah. In that brief instant, both father and daughter felt the weight of their accomplishment. Then, Max slipped away, blending quietly into the undergrowth, embodying the stealth that makes cats such effective hunters. Sarah wiped away a tear, not bothering to conceal her emotions from her dad. "You did good, kiddo," Jim said gently, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "You really did." In the months that followed, their wildlife cameras occasionally revealed glimpses of a healthy young cat in the release area. His spotted coat was easy to recognize for those who knew what to look for. Max had not just survived, he was thriving. His presence played a vital role in maintaining the delicate balance of the ecosystem. Jim often reflected on that winter morning when he chose to take action. In his long career, that moment stood out as one where the line between following protocols and showing compassion blurred, resulting in something truly remarkable. The story of Max transformed from just a successful rehabilitation into a demonstration of how human kindness, paired with knowledge and respect for nature, can have meaningful outcomes. Sarah kept a single photo at her desk in the rehabilitation center, featuring Max on the day of his release. His proud posture and alert eyes embodied everything they had worked so hard to protect. This image served as a daily reminder of the significance of their work, often drawing the attention of visitors and potential volunteers. A year after Max's release, Jim was out conducting his routine wildlife surveys when he stumbled upon something extraordinary. In a protected hollow under a rocky overhang, he discovered traces of a cat den. As he approached quietly, relying on his years of experience, he caught sight of a familiar figure. Max, now fully grown and watchful over two young kittens of his own. Max had not only survived, he had found a mate and was now contributing to the next generation. Jim's trained eye quickly noted that Max still displayed the distinctive spots that made him recognizable during his rehabilitation. However, now he moved with the assured grace of a mature predator. The tiny shapes barely visible in the shadows of the den were a testament to nature's resilience and the far-reaching impact of that pivotal intervention. That evening, Jim couldn't wait to share his discovery. During dinner, Sarah and Jim found themselves discussing the implications of their work at the rehabilitation center. Over the years, the facility had expanded, taking in more animals and training new staff to maintain the delicate balance between helping those creatures and allowing them to thrive naturally. "You know what I sometimes think about?" Sarah said, pushing her plate aside and leaning in. "That morning with the wolves. If you hadn't been there and made that split-second decision." Jim nodded, understanding her train of thought. It's fascinating how one small action can create ripples we don't anticipate. Max isn't just a rescued cat anymore. He has become part of a larger story about the recovery of the ecosystem. The success of Max's rehabilitation and release extended far beyond just one cat's experience. Sarah meticulously documented his case, creating a resource that other wildlife rehabilitation centers could use for orphaned predators. The protocols they developed during Max's care were refined and shared, ultimately helping improve survival rates for other young animals in similar situations. Max's story also played a key role in building connections between the local ranching community and wildlife conservationists. When Sarah presented Max's case at a community meeting focusing on the balance between predator conservation and human intervention, she was surprised by the positive response. Even some ranchers, who typically saw these predators as threats, began to recognize the benefits of a healthy wildlife population. Fast forward 5 years after Max's rescue, the Montana Wildlife Rehabilitation Center had established itself as a leading facility known for its successful rehabilitation and release programs. Sarah expanded her role, training new veterinarians in wildlife care while still overseeing critical cases. Jim, though officially retired, continued conducting wildlife surveys, with his expertise proving invaluable in tracking the health of local predator populations. The wolf pack that had once posed a danger to Max still roamed the area, although their numbers and territory had shifted over time. Shadow, the alpha female, had given birth to several litters of pups, ensuring the pack's ongoing presence within the ecosystem. Jim's observations revealed how the wolves had adapted to the changing conditions, with their hunting patterns evolving to focus more on traditional prey like deer and elk as those populations began to recover. One crisp autumn morning, as Jim checked his wildlife cameras, he noticed. While exploring the tracks that formed an interesting story in the mud by a stream, Jim discovered the unmistakable prints of a wolf pack. Nearby, there were smaller but assertive tracks from a cat, likely Max, indicating they had both been in the same area just hours apart. However, unlike the tense encounters of previous years, these tracks indicated no signs of hunting or struggle. Instead, they reflected the normal habits of predators coexisting in shared territory, each fulfilling a role in the intricate web of forest life. Jim realized this was a significant testament to their efforts. It wasn't only about saving one animal, but about restoring the natural balance. The forest could support both wolves and cats, with each contributing to the health of the ecosystem. As he examined the tracks in the soft morning light, a familiar sound caught his attention, the gentle steps of paws on fallen leaves. Looking up, he spotted a mature cat moving gracefully through the underbrush. The cat paused for a moment, its bright yellow eyes meeting Jim's in a silent exchange that seemed to bridge the gap between wild animals and humans. Whether this cat was Max or one of his offspring was unclear, but that detail was less important. What truly mattered was the cat's confident demeanor, showing it was entirely comfortable in its surroundings, exhibiting neither fear nor reliance on humans. This, Jim thought, was the true measure of successful wildlife rehabilitation. It was not merely about saving a life, but about preserving an animal's essential wild nature. As the cat vanished into the forest as quietly as it had appeared, Jim felt a deep sense of fulfillment. Throughout his decades of wildlife work, he had witnessed both successes and setbacks, experiencing the sometimes harsh realities of nature and the necessity for human involvement. Max's journey symbolized an ideal balance between these forces, a moment where human compassion, informed by scientific understanding and respect for nature, had helped sustain the delicate harmony of the wild. At the rehabilitation center, Sarah was gearing up for the next generation of wildlife stewards, sharing lessons learned from stories like Max's. The center had expanded to incorporate educational programs for local schools, aiming to build understanding and appreciation for wildlife among the community's youth. As she taught her students, she emphasized the importance of knowing when to intervene and when to let nature take its course. Understanding when to step in and when to hold back is essential. Nature has its own way of maintaining balance, and it's important that we don't disrupt this balance. Our role should be to help restore it, especially when human actions or unusual situations throw it off course. Take, for instance, the story of Max the cat. He stood up to a wolf pack and, against all odds, managed to survive. This experience didn't just stop there. It became part of a broader narrative about wildlife rehabilitation and a symbol of hope. It reminds us that even in the toughest circumstances, there's space for compassion and support, guided by understanding. As time went on, more animals found their way through the doors of Jim and Sarah's center, each carrying their own stories of survival. Yet, Max's story stands out as a powerful example of how a single act of knowledge and compassion can shift the grand picture of wilderness preservation. The photograph in Sarah's office became a focal point, inspiring discussions about wildlife conservation and humanity's role in safeguarding our natural world. Somewhere in the Montana forest, Max's legacy continues through his offspring, forming an integral part of the ecosystem's story of survival and renewal. Jim and Sarah's efforts demonstrated that while nature can be harsh, it has the potential to find balance again, especially when we intervene thoughtfully. Their experiences, woven together with Max's, contribute to the larger narrative of wildlife conservation in America, highlighting that every life saved and every animal successfully returned to the wild plays a part in preserving the natural heritage we all strive to protect.